The knock at the door came unexpectedly. It wasn't the kind of knock that one could ignore. Quick, sharp, demanding attention. It was a late afternoon and the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow across the small living room. She was in the middle of sorting through old papers, tidying up the house as she always did when her mind was restless. But this time, the sound that echoed through the room wasn't the usual hum of life. It was different, foreboding. The knock had a weight to it, a sense of urgency that made her feel uneasy. She stood up, her heart racing as she made her way toward the door. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of her own breathing. There was something unsettling about the silence that stretched before her. She wasn't expecting anyone, not at this hour. Maybe it was a mistake, someone at the wrong address. But as her hand reached for the doorknob, she felt the strange pull of something more. She opened the door slowly, her thoughts running faster than her movements. On the other side stood a man she had never seen before. He was tall, wearing a dark coat that seemed out of place for the mild weather. His eyes, dark and serious, met hers with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. He looked at her for a long moment, almost as if he were weighing something in his mind. "Good evening," he said, his voice low but clear. "May I speak with you?" She hesitated, instinctively stepping back. There was something about the way he stood there, the calmness in his demeanor that felt off, but curiosity, or maybe the unease that was growing inside her, pushed her to open the door wider just a crack more. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaky but firm. She hadn't expected a visitor, certainly not someone she didn't know. "My name is not important right now," he replied, his eyes not leaving hers. "But I have information that you need to hear. Something about your father." The words hit her like a punch. Her father. She hadn't heard much about him in years. He had always been a man of few words, a man who kept to himself, never really opening up about his past. For as long as she could remember, he had always been a quiet figure in her life, steady but distant. They had grown apart over the years, their conversations growing fewer, their bond weakening with time. Yet the mention of him by a stranger sent a ripple of confusion through her. "About my father?" she repeated, trying to make sense of the words. "What about him?" The man nodded slowly, his gaze still unwavering. "I know it's hard to understand, but there are things about your father's past that you don't know. Things that are important for you to know now." Her mind raced as she processed his words. What could this stranger possibly know about her father? She didn't even know this man, had never seen him before in her life. He must have mistaken her for someone else, right? Yet the way he spoke, so assured, so confident, left her with no easy way out of this strange moment. She couldn't simply close the door and pretend nothing had happened. There was something serious in his tone, something that made her feel that whatever he was about to say was more than just casual conversation. "Please," the man continued, his voice softening slightly. "Let me explain. There's a truth that you need to hear. I'm not here to cause trouble, I'm here to help." She stood frozen at the door, torn between her instinct to push him away and the curiosity that was gnawing at her, pulling her toward him. Something about his words felt urgent, like a message she couldn't ignore. She couldn't deny that a part of her was desperate for answers, for something more than the silence and distance that had defined her relationship with her father for so long. She stepped aside, her heart pounding. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded and walked into the house, glancing around briefly as if he were taking in the surroundings. He didn't make himself comfortable, though. He simply stood in the entryway, still looking at her with those intense eyes. "Do you want something to drink?" she asked, the nerves in her voice betraying her calm facade. She was trying to offer him some small measure of hospitality, even though she didn't fully understand what was happening. "No," he replied, shaking his head. "This won't take long. I just need to tell you what you need to know." She led him into the living room and motioned for him to sit. He didn't sit, though, continuing to stand near the window. The air between them was thick, filled with an unspoken tension. She could feel her pulse quicken as she waited for him to speak, wondering what could possibly be so urgent, so important, that this stranger had come all the way to her doorstep. Finally, he spoke. "Your father," he began, his voice steady but heavy, "has a past that he has kept hidden. It's a past that involves people you would never expect, people who would do anything to make sure this secret stays buried. I've come because I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. There are things that could change everything for you, for your family." She sat down, her legs suddenly feeling weak beneath her. Her father, a secret? Her mind flashed back to the few things she knew about him. The quiet, almost stoic man who had never talked much about his past. He had always been a mystery to her, someone who kept his distance. But the thought that there was something about him, something hidden from her all these years, made her feel like the ground beneath her was shifting. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What kind of secret?" The man took a deep breath as though preparing himself for something difficult. "Your father wasn't just an ordinary man. He's been involved in things that go beyond what you could imagine, and now those things are catching up to him. They're going to affect everything." She felt her world tilt as her thoughts scrambled to make sense of his words. Her father, a man who had always seemed so quiet, so unassuming. What could he have done? What was the truth that this stranger was telling her? She didn't know whether to feel terrified, confused, or angry. All she knew was that this conversation was just the beginning of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. The man stood there, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I need you to understand. The truth will come out whether you're ready for it or not. And when it does, everything you thought you knew about your father will change." Her heart raced. The knock at the door was just the beginning, and whatever this stranger was about to tell her, it was going to turn her life upside down. The air in the room felt thick with tension. Her father's words hung in the space between them like a heavy fog, waiting to be broken. She stared at him, waiting for him to continue, but he remained silent. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing as she tried to process what had just been revealed. The idea that her father had been hiding something from her all these years seemed impossible. He was the man who had raised her, the man who had always been her protector. How could there be a part of his life that she knew nothing about? What kind of secret could he have been carrying for so long? For a moment, her mind wandered back to that strange encounter with the man at the door. She couldn't shake the image of the stranger's eyes filled with an urgency that unsettled her. Why had he come to her house? And why had he been so intent on speaking with her father? What was it that he knew? Something so important that it had caused this disruption in their lives. Her father finally broke the silence, his voice low and hesitant. "I'm not proud of what I'm about to tell you. It's something I've kept buried for years because I didn't want it to affect you. But now it's too late to hide from the truth." She leaned forward, her gaze fixed on him. She needed to know, no matter how difficult it was to hear. "Tell me, Dad. I'm ready." He looked at her with a mixture of sadness and regret, then took a deep breath. "When I was younger, I was involved in things that I'm not proud of. I made decisions that I thought were right at the time, but in hindsight I can see how wrong they were. I hurt people who didn't deserve it." Her stomach turned. This wasn't the man she had known. She had always seen him as a quiet, steady figure, someone who had never made mistakes, who had always done the right thing. But now she was hearing about a version of him she had never imagined. "What kind of things, Dad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He ran his hand through his hair, his eyes downcast. "I was involved in some criminal activities. Not the kind of thing that makes the news, but enough to cause damage. I was a part of a group that hurt people for money. We took from others and we did things that, well, things I wish I could undo." The words stung. Her mind couldn't quite grasp the full meaning of what he was saying. Her father, the man who had always been the rock in her life, had been involved in something so dark, so completely opposite of the man she had known. "It didn't make sense. Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why did you hide this from me? I deserve to know, I know," he said softly. "But I didn't want you to think less of me. I wanted you to see me as the man who took care of you, who gave you everything you needed. I didn't want you to know about the mistakes I made before I became the person I am now. I thought if I could just move forward, leave that past behind me, we could have a normal life. I wanted you to have a better life than I had." Her father's words hung in the air like a confession, and yet they felt incomplete. What had driven him to get involved in such things? Why had he taken those actions, knowing the harm they could cause? "You're telling me that all these years you've been living a lie?" she asked, her voice cracking. "That everything I thought I knew about you was fake?" "I never meant to deceive you," he replied, his voice breaking. "But yes, in a way I have been living a lie. I've kept my past hidden, because I didn't want to burden you with it. I thought I could protect you from the truth, but now it's come to light and I can't run from it anymore. The weight of his words was almost too much to bear. She felt as though the ground beneath her feet was shifting, like the world she had known was suddenly unrecognizable. Her father, the man who had always been her hero, had a past that she could never have imagined. And it wasn't just any past, it was a dark and painful history, one that was now threatening to tear apart everything she had believed about him. "But why now?" she asked, her voice shaking with frustration. "Why is this coming out now? Why did that man come to the door today?" Her father's face grew darker, and for a moment it seemed as if he was struggling to find the words. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. "That man, he was part of the group I was involved with. He's the one I hurt. He's the one I betrayed. And now he's come to collect what he's owed." The revelation hit her like a punch to the stomach. "What do you mean, collect what he's owed?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her father closed his eyes, his face etched with guilt. "The things I did when I was younger, they didn't just go away. They followed me. That man, he's here to make me pay for the things I did. I thought I could outrun it all, but now it's come back to haunt me. And it's going to affect you too." Her mind raced. The past her father had tried so hard to bury was now catching up with him, and the repercussions of his actions were about to unfold in ways she couldn't yet understand. What had she just stepped into? "You don't have to face this alone, Dad," she said, her voice firm. "We'll figure it out together. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself." Her father looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "I don't deserve your help, but I'm glad you're here. I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I've spent years trying to make amends for my mistakes, but now I see that it's not just about me anymore. It's about you, and I'll do everything in my power to protect you from the consequences of my actions." She felt a pang of sadness, mixed with a deep sense of love for the man who had always been there for her. This was not the father she had known, but in some strange way it was still the same man. A man who had made mistakes, who had hurt others, but who was now seeking redemption no matter how difficult the road ahead would be. "We'll get through this, Dad," she said, her voice steady. "We'll face the truth together and we'll figure out a way forward. You're not alone in this." Her father nodded, his face softening for the first time since the conversation had begun. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for understanding." And in that moment she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it as a family. No matter how painful the truth was, they would face it together, and they would find a way to move forward. Her father had made mistakes, but he was still her father. And she wasn't about to let go of the man who had always been there for her, even if the truth about his past was much more complicated than she had ever imagined. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Her mind kept going back to the conversation she had with her father. Every word seemed to echo in her head, making it hard to focus on anything else. She couldn't stop thinking about the man who had come to their door, the man who had set everything in motion. Why had he come now? What was he planning? What would become of her father? And how would their lives be changed forever by the truths that had been revealed? Her father, once so calm and composed, now seemed like a shadow of the man he had been. She noticed his nervousness more than ever. He hardly slept, and when he did, he tossed and turned in his bed. The burden of his past seemed to weigh heavier on him by the day. His hands, once steady, now trembled at the slightest movement. He would sit for hours in silence, staring out the window, lost in thoughts of his past life, regrets he couldn't undo, mistakes that had now come back to haunt him. She had tried to ask him more about his past, but he remained closed off. Each time she broached the subject, his face would darken, and he would tell her that the past was something he couldn't change. He kept saying, "It's done. There's nothing more to say." But she knew that wasn't true. His past had come knocking on their door, and it wasn't something that could just be forgotten. It wasn't just her father who was affected. The tension in the house was palpable. Her mother, who had always been a quiet, loving presence, seemed distant. She noticed her mother's worried looks when she thought no one was watching, the way she would look at her father with concern but never speak of it. They both knew that whatever was coming, it wasn't going to be easy, and they didn't know how to face it. It was on a rainy afternoon, when the sound of raindrops against the windows created an atmosphere of sadness, that the stranger returned. This time the knock was softer, almost hesitant, but it still sent a jolt of fear through her. She didn't know what to expect, but she had a feeling that the moment had finally arrived, the moment when her father's past would catch up with him completely. She opened the door, this time not waiting for him to ask for her father. She knew why he had come. The man stood in front of her again, looking much like he had before, his eyes just as intense, his posture rigid. This time he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by another man, someone she didn't recognize. The second man was taller, his face hard and unreadable. He wore a dark suit as if prepared for business. But what kind of business was this? "Is he home?" the stranger asked, his voice just as low and urgent as before. She nodded. "Yes, he is. But I'm not sure if you should." "I need to speak with him," the first man interrupted, cutting her off. "It's important." Her heart raced. She stepped aside, allowing them to enter, but she had a sinking feeling in her gut. She didn't know what they wanted or what they were planning, but it couldn't be good. Her father emerged from the kitchen, looking at the two men with an expression she hadn't seen before, one of dread mixed with resignation. He knew exactly who they were, and he didn't want her to know either. "I wasn't expecting you," her father said, his voice strained. The stranger glanced at the second man, then looked back at her father. "We need to talk. It's about what you owe." She could feel the air in the room shift. There was a tension there that seemed to draw the very breath from her lungs. The two men were here for something more than just answers. They had come to collect something her father owed, something that would change everything for their family. Her father didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his eyes on the floor, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. It was clear that this wasn't something he had planned for, something he had hoped to avoid. The stranger spoke again. "You've had years to make things right. You've had years to fix your mistakes, but now it's time to pay the price for what you've done." Her father's face grew pale. She could see the struggle in his eyes, the regret, the fear of what was to come. She wanted to step in, to protect him, to tell these men to leave, but she knew better than that. This wasn't something that could be stopped. Her father's past was now coming to the surface, and nothing could change that. She turned away from the scene, walking back to the kitchen. She didn't want to hear what was happening, but she couldn't help herself. The tension in the air made her heart race, and she knew that everything was about to change. Hours passed before the men left. Her father didn't speak a word to her as they left, and she didn't know how to ask what had just happened. What did they want? What had he agreed to? She didn't know, but she was afraid to find out. Her father spent the rest of the evening in his chair staring at the same spot on the wall. He was lost in his thoughts, his mind far away from the present. She could see the guilt eating away at him, but there was nothing she could say to make it better. He had made choices that had brought them all to this point. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. What was going to happen next? Would this man come back again? And if so, what would they do? She couldn't protect her father from the consequences of his actions. All she could do was wait. The next morning, she found her father in the kitchen. He was making breakfast, his hands shaking slightly as he cracked the eggs into the pan. His movements were slow, careful. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had never looked so tired. "Dad?" she said softly, approaching him. "What happened last night?" He didn't look at her right away. He just stood there, stirring the eggs. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "They want money. They want what I owe." Her heart sank. "How much?" Her father sighed. "It doesn't matter. It's not about the money. It's about the fact that I can't outrun my past anymore. They want me to make things right, but I don't know how." She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "We'll figure it out, together. We'll get through this." Her father's gaze met hers, and for the first time in days, she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I don't deserve your help, but thank you," he whispered. They were facing something huge, something they couldn't control. But she was determined to stand by him no matter what. Together they would face whatever came next. For better or worse, they were in this together. The truth was out, and now they had to find a way to move forward. It wouldn't be easy, but they would try, because that's what family did. Together, they would face whatever came next. Days turned into weeks, and the heavy air that had settled over the house didn't seem to lift. Her father's past had become a shadow that followed them everywhere, and no matter how hard they tried to keep their lives normal, it was impossible to ignore the looming presence of what was coming. The man who had come to their door and the other figures connected to him had left a trail of fear and uncertainty. No one knew exactly when the next confrontation would occur, but everyone felt it hanging over them. Her father spent every waking hour in a state of anxiety. His eyes were tired, his movements slow. She saw the way he avoided looking at her. He couldn't bring himself to speak more about his past, and she couldn't push him anymore. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how. The weight of the secret he had kept for so long was more than she could comprehend, and each day felt heavier. Her mother tried to keep things together, acting as though everything was normal, but her forced smiles were clear to see. One evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, her father finally broke the silence. He had been quiet all evening, pushing his food around on his plate, clearly lost in his thoughts. Her mother, trying to keep things light, talked about a neighbor's new garden, but the conversation felt hollow. "I need to tell you more," her father said suddenly, his voice rough and strained. The words caught her off guard. She looked up at him, her heart racing. She had been waiting for him to speak, but now that the moment had come, she wasn't sure if she was ready. "About what, Dad?" she asked quietly. He swallowed hard, his hands shaking slightly as he put down his fork. He avoided her gaze, staring at the table instead. "About the man who came here, and about what I did to get involved with them." Her heart thudded in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. She had been waiting for this, but hearing it out loud made it all feel too real. She reached out across the table and gently touched his hand. "You can tell me. I'm ready." He nodded slowly and took a deep breath. "When I was younger, I didn't know any better. I was living in a world where the choices were hard. Everything was about survival. The man who came to the door, he's not just a stranger. He was a part of a life I should have left behind, but I couldn't escape it." Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the details. Her father's words didn't make sense at first, but she had the sense that something bigger was at play. "What do you mean, a part of a life?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I got involved with people who had money and power. They promised things, promised a future that seemed better than the one I had. But that life was built on lies and manipulation. I wasn't the only one in it. There were others, people who relied on each other to survive. But we didn't realize what we were really doing until it was too late." Her father's eyes grew distant, as though he were reliving the moments he was describing. "I didn't choose the right path. I got into things I shouldn't have, and I hurt people in the process. I didn't see it then, but now looking back, I can't escape the guilt." She squeezed his hand, urging him to continue, but part of her was scared. She had always seen him as the one who had all the answers, who had always been there for her. Now she was hearing a version of her father that she didn't know, a side of him that was unfamiliar and full of regret. "The man who came to the door," he continued, "he was one of the people I betrayed. I took from him and I never paid the price. He's been trying to find me ever since. Now he's come to make sure I pay for what I did." She felt a lump form in her throat. She could hardly imagine her father as someone who could betray anyone, let alone get involved in something that caused harm. But the truth was right there in front of her, unfolding in ways she had never anticipated. "What does he want from you?" she asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Her father's voice grew quieter, filled with sorrow. "He wants everything. He wants me to repay what I took from him. Money, favors, anything that can make up for the damage I did. But it's not just about the money. It's about redemption. He wants me to pay for my mistakes, but I don't know if I can. I don't know if I have enough to make up for what I did." Her heart ached as she watched him, the man she had always looked up to now broken and vulnerable. She could see the shame in his eyes, the weight of the burden he had carried for so long. He had made decisions that couldn't be undone, and now he was facing the consequences. "You don't have to do this alone, Dad," she said softly. "I'm here. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." He looked at her then, his eyes filled with gratitude and pain. "I don't deserve your help, but I can't keep carrying this alone. I've tried for so long to protect you from the truth, but now it's too late. I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can try to make it right." The words didn't fully make sense to her, but she could see the truth in them. Her father, the man who had raised her with love and strength, was now facing the consequences of his actions, and he didn't know how to move forward. Over the next few days, the tension in the house grew. Her father spent more time on the phone, talking to people from his past. She could hear the frustration and fear in his voice during the conversations, but no matter how hard she tried, he wouldn't share the details with her. He had closed himself off, retreating into a world of his own guilt and shame. One evening, as they sat in silence in the living room, the doorbell rang. The sound broke the quiet, and her father stiffened. She knew that whatever was happening, it had reached its peak. Her father stood up, his face a mask of resolve. "Stay here," he said, his voice firm but filled with worry. She wanted to protest, but she knew better. This was his battle, and all she could do was stand by him. She watched as he walked to the door, his steps heavy, his mind clearly somewhere else. The man was back, and this time it was clear that things were about to change. Whatever had been promised, whatever payment was owed, this was the moment when the past would finally come to collect its price. The door opened, and she could hear their voices in the hallway. It was quiet at first, but then the conversation grew louder. Her father's voice rose in anger, and the other man's words were sharp and demanding. She stood up, her heart pounding, unable to stay away any longer. She moved toward the door but stopped before crossing the threshold. She didn't want to intrude on something she wasn't ready for. But then, she heard her father's voice, broken and desperate. "I've done what I can. I can't give you what you want. Please, just leave us alone." The words hit her like a wave, and she couldn't stay hidden any longer. She opened the door, stepping into the hallway, and saw her father standing there, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. The man was still there, but now he was leaving. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Her father turned to her, his face a mix of relief and defeat. "It's over," he said softly. "But I don't know what comes next." She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him, offering him the comfort he had always given her. The road ahead was uncertain, and their lives would never be the same. But at that moment she knew that together, they would face whatever came next. Because no matter how dark the past was, they still had each other. Weeks passed, and though the immediate threat had faded, the aftershocks of the event still lingered in the air. Her father, despite his best efforts to put on a brave face, was not the same man he had been before. The weight of his past mistakes, the burden of the truth he had carried for so long, was something he couldn't simply shake off. Each day felt like a struggle, and she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he carried the weight of it all with every step he took. At times, she would catch him staring off into the distance, lost in thought. She knew he was replaying every decision he had made, every mistake he had ever regretted. The shame that had been hanging over him for so long was now impossible to escape. But despite everything, he was trying. He was trying to rebuild, to make things right, even if it felt impossible. She too had changed. The girl who had once looked at her father with admiration and trust had now seen him as a man with flaws and scars. But that didn't change her love for him. If anything, it deepened her understanding of what it meant to be human, to be imperfect. She had learned that sometimes redemption didn't come easily, and sometimes it didn't come at all, but that didn't mean it wasn't worth trying. One afternoon, as she was sitting by the window watching the rain fall gently outside, she heard the sound of her father's voice coming from the kitchen. It was softer than usual, calm in a way that it hadn't been in weeks. She stood up, walking into the room, unsure of what to expect. Her father was on the phone, his voice steady, but there was something different about it. He wasn't frantic or fearful. He wasn't trying to hide anything anymore. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, he had made peace with what had happened. She watched him from the doorway, not wanting to interrupt, but something inside her told her this was the moment when everything might change. She had always been afraid to ask him what had really happened, afraid to hear the full extent of his past. But now she knew that the truth, as painful as it was the only way to move forward. When he hung up the phone, he looked at her, his eyes tired but resolute. "It's over," he said softly. "I've done what I can to make things right. The ones who were after me, they won't bother us anymore. It's not perfect, but it's enough." She didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she should feel relief or sadness, but she knew one thing for sure. Her father had finally faced his past. He had done what he could, and now it was time to move on. He had made his peace with the mistakes he had made, and that was something she could respect. For the first time in months, there was a sense of calm in their home. The tension that had once gripped every room, every conversation, had lifted. There was still a long road ahead, but they were no longer trapped by the past. They were free to rebuild, to start fresh. It wouldn't be easy, but they would face it together. That evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, the atmosphere felt different. There were no more awkward silences or forced smiles. Her father, despite everything, was still the man who had taught her to be strong, to be kind, to keep fighting no matter what. And now he was showing her that redemption wasn't just about fixing mistakes. It was about accepting them and finding a way to move forward. "I don't know what's next for us," her father said, breaking the silence, "but I know that we're still here. And that's something." She smiled, a sense of peace settling over her. "We'll figure it out, together." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. The following days were filled with small steps toward healing. They began to rebuild their relationship, to talk openly about what had happened and what the future held. Her father wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was all she could ask for. She noticed the change in him, the way he was more present, more engaged. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was a start. He began to take up hobbies he had neglected for years, like gardening and reading. He even started to laugh again, something that had seemed impossible just weeks before. She joined him in these small moments, helping him in the garden, sitting beside him while he read, and slowly they started to heal. It was a long process, but each day felt like a victory. They weren't the same people they had been before, but they were learning how to be something new, something stronger, something more understanding. Her mother, too, seemed to breathe a little easier. She had always been the rock of the family, the one who kept everything together when everything felt like it was falling apart. But now even she seemed to have let go of the weight she had carried for so long. The burden of their family's secret had affected her too, in ways that hadn't been obvious before. But now she was starting to smile more, to talk about things other than the past. Together they were moving forward. The past was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer had the power to control them. They had learned to face it, to accept it, and to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it was. There were still difficult days ahead. They still had to rebuild their finances, their trust in each other, and their sense of normalcy. But the road ahead was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with hope. And for the first time in a long time, they could see the future ahead of them. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the TV quietly playing in the background, her father turned to her and said, "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm proud of how far we've come. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it. And I'll keep trying every day to be better." She smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart. "We'll always be in this together. That's what matters." And with that, they both knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side, stronger than ever before. The journey had been long, and the road had been filled with pain and uncertainty. But through it all, they had learned that the most important thing was not to erase the past, but to embrace it, learn from it, and find the strength to keep moving forward. And in the end, that was what mattered the most, their ability to face the truth, to forgive and to keep going together. Months passed, and while the past would never fully fade, the family had found a way to adapt, to live in a world where the truth was out, and they were free to move forward. Her father, once a man weighed down by guilt and regret, was now learning to live without the constant shadow of his past looming over him. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day they all felt a little lighter. Their home was no longer a place of fear and uncertainty, but a place of hope. Her father had started taking small steps toward healing. He'd found solace in the simple things, gardening, fixing things around the house, reading books he hadn't touched in years. The quiet activities gave him a sense of purpose, a feeling that he was slowly putting the pieces of his life back together. He still had moments of doubt, still found himself haunted by the mistakes of his past, but he no longer let those moments control him. She had never imagined that the man who had once been so firm in his convictions, so confident in his decisions, could be so vulnerable. It was hard to reconcile the father she had known, the one who had always seemed like a pillar of strength, with the man he had become. But that too was part of the healing process. She had learned that true strength wasn't about being invincible. It was about being able to face your fears, your mistakes, and still move forward. Her mother, too, had started to let go of the burdens she had carried. For years, she had been the steady foundation of the family, the one who kept everything together when it seemed like the world was falling apart. But now, she was learning to lean on others, to accept that it wasn't just her job to fix everything. The change was subtle but noticeable. Her smiles were more genuine, Her laughter came more easily and she seemed to carry less weight on her shoulders. The house had begun to feel like a home again. The walls, once heavy with the tension of secrets and regrets, now felt light. It wasn't perfect, but it was real and it was theirs. There were still difficult conversations to be had, still moments when the past crept in and threatened to pull them back. But those moments didn't have the same power they once did. They had learned how to face them, to talk about the hard things, and to move through them together. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, her father spoke up. It had become a regular thing, talking about the day, sharing their thoughts, and connecting with each other. This time, though, the words he spoke were different. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," he began, his voice steady. "I don't know what's coming, but I know that I want to make the most of the time we have. I don't want to waste any more time living in regret or fear. I've made mistakes, but I can't keep living like they define me." Her mother nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "We all make mistakes," she said. "What matters is what we do with them." She looked at her father, who was looking at her mother with a newfound sense of peace in his eyes. "I've been thinking about the same thing," he continued. "There's so much I want to do, so much I still want to experience. I've spent so long thinking that I didn't deserve any of it, but maybe that's not true. Maybe I still have time to change, to be the person I want to be." Her heart swelled with emotion. She had never seen her father speak like this before, never heard him express such hope for the future. It wasn't a grand revelation, but it was something that gave her faith in what lay ahead. "I think we all deserve a chance to be happy," she said quietly, looking at both of her parents. "We've been through so much, but we're still here. We can still make a life for ourselves, one where the past doesn't have to control us." Her father's eyes softened as he looked at her. "You're right," he said. "We still have time, and I want to make sure that we don't waste it." The conversation drifted to lighter topics, but the words he had spoken lingered in the air, leaving behind a sense of possibility. They had all endured so much, but they had survived. They were still standing, still trying, and that in itself was something to be proud of. The next few months were filled with small but significant changes. They spent more time together, family outings, quiet evenings at home, shared meals. They traveled to places they had always talked about but never visited. It was nothing extravagant, but it was enough. They were making memories, learning to enjoy each other's company again without the constant weight of the past holding them back. Her father had started volunteering at a local charity, helping others who had fallen on hard times. It wasn't about redemption. It was about giving back, about showing that he still had something to offer. He didn't talk much about it, but she could see the difference it made in him. It gave him a sense of purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, and that was more than he had had in a long time. Her mother had begun taking art classes, something she had always wanted to do but had never made time for. It was a small thing, but it made her happy. It reminded her that it was okay to take time for herself, to pursue her own interests and dreams. It was a reminder that despite everything that had happened, they could still find joy in the simple things. And then there was her. She had learned to be more patient, more understanding. The road to forgiveness had been long, but she had found peace in knowing that they were all doing the best they could. She wasn't the same person she had been before the storm of revelations had hit, but that was okay. She had grown, and so had her family. They had all learned something important, that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey. One day as she walked through the house, she stopped in the living room, looking out the window at the garden her father had worked so hard on. It was lush and green, a beautiful symbol of the new life they were building together. The past was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer held the power it once had. They were finally free. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced down to see a message from her father. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" She smiled, her heart full. "We have, and we're just getting started." She sent the message and sat back for a moment, taking in the view. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she was okay with that. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The journey had been difficult, but they had learned to walk through it hand in hand, stronger than they had ever been before. And that, she knew, was all that really mattered. A year had passed since that night when the truth was revealed, and the changes within the family were undeniable. The man who had once been bound by guilt and shame, who had spent so many years living in fear of the past, was no longer the same person. He had shed the weight of his mistakes not by erasing them, but by accepting them, learning from them, and most importantly, moving forward. It was a quiet transformation, but one that was felt deeply by everyone in the house. Her father had never been one to speak openly about his feelings, but now there were moments when he shared things that he had never expressed before. It was as though, with the passage of time, he had finally made peace with his past and could begin to look ahead without fear. He no longer avoided conversations about the past, nor did he hide from his mistakes. He had learned to acknowledge them, and in doing so, had learned to forgive himself. Her mother, too, had changed. The quiet strength that had always been a part of her was still there, but now it was tempered with a sense of peace. She no longer carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had learned, too, that she didn't have to fix everything. It was a lesson that had taken time, but it had made her stronger. She had become more open with her emotions, more willing to lean on others, and most importantly, more willing to take care of herself. The family had grown closer, not because they had forgotten the past, but because they had learned to accept it. They had learned to embrace the reality of what had happened and the lessons it had taught them. There were still moments of pain, of course, moments when the scars of the past would resurface, but now those moments didn't feel like insurmountable obstacles. They were simply reminders of how far they had come, how much they had overcome. One Saturday afternoon, they sat together in the living room, a rare moment of quiet amidst the usual busyness of life. Her father was sitting in his favorite chair, a book in his hands, while her mother sat on the couch flipping through a magazine. She was on the floor, organizing a small pile of family photos, some of which were older than she was. It was a peaceful afternoon, the kind of afternoon they hadn't had in years. "I've been thinking," her father said, breaking the silence, "about the future and how we've made it this far, and I realize that we've been given a chance, a second chance to live the life we want, to be the people we want to be." She paused, glancing up at him. He was looking at her mother now, a soft smile on his face. It was the first time in a long time that she had seen him speak so openly about the future, without the weight of the past hanging over him. "You've always been a fighter," her mother replied with a warm smile. "And so have you." She turned to her daughter, who had been watching them quietly. "We all are. We've all fought for each other, for ourselves, and now it's time to live for the present." Her father nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I think I spent so much of my life running from my past, trying to hide from the things I'd done, that I didn't see what I had in front of me. I didn't see the family I had, the love we shared. I was so focused on fixing the past that I forgot to live in the present." She couldn't help but smile. It was a beautiful thing hearing him speak like this. For so long he had carried such a heavy burden, and now it seemed he had found a way to put it down. They had all found a way to let go of the things that had been holding them back. Her mother reached over and took his hand, a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. "We're here, all of us together, and that's what matters." For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She had spent so many years wondering if they would ever be able to move forward, if they would ever be able to heal from the scars of their past. But now she saw that they were healing. They were growing together. As they sat there, the weight of the world no longer bearing down on them, the future seemed full of possibilities. They had been through so much, but they had made it through together. The journey had been long, but it had also been worth it. They had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it and moving forward with open hearts. The following months were filled with small moments of joy, moments that were easy to take for granted before. They took weekend trips to nearby parks, explored new hobbies, and celebrated the small victories along the way. Her father had even started writing again, something he hadn't done in years. He would spend hours at the kitchen table, pen in hand, lost in thought as he wrote. She had no idea what he was writing, but she knew it was something important to him. Her mother had started spending more time with friends, reconnecting with people she hadn't seen in years. It was something she had neglected in the past, too focused on the family and the weight of everything that had happened. But now she was finding balance. She was learning how to take care of herself, how to enjoy life in ways she hadn't before. And then there was her. She had learned to be more patient, more understanding. The road to forgiveness had been long, but she had found peace in knowing that they were all doing the best they could. She wasn't the same person she had been before the storm of revelations had hit, but that was okay. She had grown, and so had her family. They had all learned something important, that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey. One day as she walked through the house, she stopped in the living room, looking out the window at the garden her father had worked so hard on. It was lush and green, a beautiful symbol of the new life they were building together. The past was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer held the power it once had. They were finally free. Her phone buzzed and she glanced down to see a message from her father. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" She smiled, her heart full. "We have, and we're just getting started." She sent the message and sat back for a moment, taking in the view. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she was okay with that. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The journey had been difficult, but they had learned to walk through it hand in hand, stronger than they had ever been before. And that, she knew, was all that really mattered.